Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. This is a podcast where we explore thoughts in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. Before we get going here, I just wanted to thank all the Patreon supporters. A couple of you guys joined this week, and that's been awesome. I want to thank everyone who's been subscribing on the YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed and you're watching this, please go ahead and just hit that subscribe button. That would be huge. Trying to get up to 1,000 here pretty quick, and hopefully if you're watching this video it's way up to like 12,000, 100,000. You're like, what is he even talking about? That'd be fantastic. But if you also another way, if you wanted to support the podcast, you could go to Apple Podcasts and leave me a 5-star review and a comment. That would be huge. Then I don't have to talk about myself so much in the openings and pester you guys with this stuff. So without further ado, let's get into the topic for today. I have with me Carl K.J. Johnson. He's the director of the Csu Institute in Chicago. And this is a dude I could talk to for hours. And I know this because like a couple of days ago, I was at his house for 5 hours talking about this stuff. So I thought it would be so fun to get him on the podcast and share all his wisdom with you guys. So KJ, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, man.
Hey, thanks. And we don't mind hearing about you. I think we're tuning in for you more than anybody else.
Well, I don't know. Dude, I'm pumped about this. This is a long time in the making here, and I'm excited to share you with the world. You work for you're the director of the C.S. Lewis Institute in Chicago. Now, that name, C.S. Lewis, it probably makes people think a bunch of people reading C.S. Lewis all the time. Like, can you just help explain what is the C.S. Lewis Institute?
Yeah, well, we're a cult, and we just sit around reading No, I was kidding. I was going to say Lord of the Rings and Chronicles of Narnia and all stuff. That's exactly what we're not. Yeah. We were founded in 1976 by two guys. We call them the two Jims, Jim Houston and Jim Hiskey. Some folks may know the name Jim Houston. He had gone on to found Regent in Vancouver with J.I. Packer. He was friends with Packer and John Stott and those kinds of guys.
Yeah.
But so Jim Houston and a guy named Jim Hiskey, and he was a professional golfer, PGA, and basically evangelized the PGA in his time. And runs around the world talking about Jesus. He's never met a gospel conversation he won't have. He's just a great guy. They saw a need to create an organization where, in their mind, was not dedicated to making more people like making more fans of Lewis, but to make more people like Lewis. They wanted to build people up in heart and mind, people who were just totally engaged in their faith in both personal and public life. And that Lewis really kind of characterizes that a bit, because he was totally sold out both in his profession with all of his writings and as well in his personal life. And it just worked out that Jim Houston was personal friends with C.S. Lewis. They'd both taught at Oxford. Houston had been there for years. So they just thought, why not sort of use him as the patron saint? And I like to think of it as, the Apostle Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ.
Right. We've
just updated the imagery a little bit of like, this is what it might look like in a modern day setting. Somebody in a professional setting who's engaged in both heart and mind completely. So we're not trying to turn people into little Lewises in the sense of we want them to become great writers or great scholars, but we want them to engage, in Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of their mind. At the same time, not becoming men without chests, as Lewis would say.
Right.
So,
man, that's all. Well, how does that work? I mean, I know, but how, for the folks at home, how does that? How do you go about making other people whose head and hearts are like Lewis's?
Well, we do it through a variety of means. We like to work as a buttress to the church rather than a parallel institution. And our mission is to see the church fulfill the Great Commission more fully. So everything we do, we try to do in and with and alongside the church. So we'll do, the typical parachurch thing. We'll do conferences and seminars and create resources. And we always try to do that in partnership with the church. But for 20 years now, we've been running this program called the C.S. Lewis Fellows Program. And it's a 1-year discipleship program where folks spend a year with us. It's not like full-time school. You keep your job, and you don't move or relocate. But you join us for a year. It's a tuition-free program. And we spend each month focusing on a different biblical theme. And we kind of plumb the depths of that theme as much as we can. And we read plenty of C.S. Lewis, but it's not all Lewis. We read Martin Lloyd-Jones, A.W. Tozer, Andrew Murray, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, fill in the blank.
Yeah.
And we spend a year building people up in heart and mind to try to give them the mind of Christ. We don't give them, but you know what I mean. Help them cultivate that. And it's also a laboratory for discipleship. You know, I like to say that you're not coming and spending a year in a spiritual spa. You're spending a year doing spiritual CrossFit. This is a year where you're gonna work out your faith and your salvation in a serious way, in a participatory community where you're going to disciple others and be discipled. You're going to get a mentor. You're going to be challenged in new ways. You know, it's one thing to read things and kind of get an academic intellectual assent. It's another thing to put those in practice.
Yeah.
And so we focus on themes of spiritual formation, Bible study, evangelism, and apologetics. I mean, you can't do Lewis without touching on evangelism and apologetics.
Right.
We focus on calling, and of course, the whole program culminates with the Great Commission, because at the end of the year, you're commissioned as a C.S. Lewis Fellow, and you build a disciple-making plan so that you can go back into your context, whether it's home, neighborhood, church, work, school, whatever it is, to go out and live out Christ as best you can.
Yeah. Well, dude, so you mentioned discipleship, and we talked a little bit about spiritual formation. Do you see a difference? So sometimes spiritual formation by, I love John MacArthur, but he used to just hammer this. I don't know if he still does. Spiritual formation, and he was like against it. And then, you get anyone who's read like Dallas Willard, and they're like, dude, that's it. Like spiritual formation and everything. When we think of spiritual formation, is it synonymous with discipleship for you? Like, how do we think? Is there a difference? Is there overlap, or the same thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would want to affirm a bit why someone like John MacArthur has, concerns or reservations. Because I think can make that into sort of a very airy-fairy, mystical thing.
Yeah.
And D.A. Carson wrote a really interesting article a few years ago. I wish I remember the title. I can give it to you so you can put it in the show notes later.
Mm-hmm.
But it cautions against turning everything into spiritual formation.
Yeah.
And there's a very deliberate approach to it. So I'm not against spiritual formation. I wouldn't say discipleship and spiritual formation are synonymous. Okay. I think there's, on a Venn diagram, there's a ton of overlap. Yeah. And I think your discipleship should engage in formation. I mean, the idea is we're supposed to be. I remember, so we have a mutual love for our professor, Kevin Van Hooser. Mm-hmm. I loved something he said once in class that really stuck out to me. He goes, Christian spirituality has a very distinct form. It's Christian form. And, if you read his latest book, Hearers and Doers, and one of his constant analogies is that you are being formed in some way or another. The question is, what's forming you? So spiritual formation is happening. I think from a Christian perspective, and in our efforts to disciple one another and ourselves, is that there should be spiritual formation. It's just like, what are those techniques that we can use to help form us more like Christ? So I like the word, I follow a guy named Donald Blesch or Bloch. I always get his last name wrong.
I always say Bloch, but everyone says different. Yeah.
Yeah, him. And then Robert Csu, who was a professor, died several years ago out of Talbot, Biola. And they use the word transformation more, and Csu likes the word spiritual transformation better. And I actually kind of like that, because we are to be transformed. Romans 12:2, transformed by the renewing of your mind. Semantics games, sure. But those practices in our discipleship, meditating on the word, perhaps if it's called for, fasting and prayer, that are things we can use. But at the same time, we can get really legalistic with our spiritual formation too. Just because you fast for, let's say you're hardcore and you fast during Holy Week, that's not going to guarantee anything. And I think Dallas Willard would affirm that as well. Tim Keller once said that legalism is earning your salvation, but discipline is doing something good in and of itself. And I think if you have that kind of approach in mind, you're doing something because it's good for you, and it's cultivating discipline or driving you deeper into the word or whatever, that's great. Silence, solitude, get away for a weekend.
Yeah.
But there's no guarantee of that either. And one of the things I think the dangers of spiritual formation is sometimes we go do those on a solo effort, and we know that, Christianity is a team sport, right?
Yeah.
So You can't go solo and just continue to, oh, I'm going to be this ascetic monk and go hide out in the cave or on the top of the tree or something like that.
Right, right. Well, yeah, that's good, dude. So discipleship can incorporate spiritual formation. Do you think that spiritual formation does have more of an individualistic aspect to it, like rightly so? Like there's the practice of solitude, or doing your evangelicals can't get away from quiet time. We can't think of a different word for that, I guess. But you're just you alone with your Bible, like in the morning or whatever, or meditating on the word alone. Whereas like discipleship doesn't really make sense to do alone at all, right?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's something to that. Although I think you can still do individual activities in community.
Hmm.
We pray together sometimes, but we also pray when we're alone.
Right.
Let's just say, it's Lent and you and I are in the same congregation. We might both choose to fast from something, and we can hold one another accountable. And so we're fasting together, but we're not fasting together. So say you're giving up caffeine for Lent, and I'm going to give up Netflix or something like that. We can just keep checking on one another on those sorts of things. So I think
That's good.
I just think sports is a great analogy. I mean, you're a wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're out there on the mat by yourself, but you train with others too. So
I was thinking the same thing, dude. That's great.
Yeah. Well, and I was, we talked about this the other day that I fenced in high school and college, and when you're on the strip, it's an individual thing, but then at the same time, it's a team sport because there's an aggregate score for how the team, and when we go back and practice and things like that. So I think the Christian life isn't that different. Ultimately, we got to perform. I mean, I can't just ride your coattails.
Right. Or your parents, right?
Right. But I can also rely on your encouragement, or sometimes the kick in the butt. Like, hey, thought you were serious about this whole faith thing. Come on.
Yeah. Dude, that's a great analogy. And with your partners or the other fencers, you're sharpening each other back in the room, and then you're cheering each other on. What's that?
Pun intended.
Sharpening each other. Well, dude, you got to say that you did saber too, and I didn't know this. I didn't know any of this, but then I was like, did you do saber or foil? And you're like, saber, and that's the most epic thing ever, because you got this big, like, I always think of like Aladdin sword, and you're like just hacking away at people. It's awesome.
It's a lot of fun.
You got that big is it a claymore behind you?
That is it was given to me by the first class of C.S. Lewis Fellows in Chicago. It's a replica of Peter's sword from Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. So
sick.
The hilt is the head of Aslan. So it's not a real sword. It's sort of a movie replica kind of thing, but it was cool. It was a gift, and they knew that I'd been a fencer, so there was sort of that play on things.
Oh, nice, dude. That's
but
awesome.
I guess in a pinch, I could use that and hack away at somebody if they're breaking in.
Totally. All the saber days come back. Well, okay, KJ, this is something that we've talked about a lot too, is so furthering on into discipleship. I work for Athletes in Action, and a lot of crew discipleship, Athletes in Action discipleship, we do emphasize one-on-one, though they're trying to get us not to. I love one-on-one discipleship. Did it this morning with one of my wrestlers. I love the intimacy. That's a weird word to say, but like such a Christian word. I love like dudes being honest. Like they'll talk to you about like, hey dude, I'm really struggling with pornography or this or that, or I just want to punch this dude in the face. And they wouldn't say that in a larger group. And so I really like that. But you always get me and you say like, dude, it's not just one-on-one. Like it's broader. Can you just explain like what is discipleship, I guess?
Yeah. Well, broadly, discipleship is a turning away from your old life and turning towards Jesus to follow him. For salvation and for eternal life, and to know him, and anything that involves that involves the cultivating of that and becoming more like. So I like to boil it down to, it should be pointing people to the work and person of Jesus Christ, helping them to become more like him in character and in person, and enjoy the union we have with him through the Holy Spirit. And if you're not somehow contributing to that, I think you're kind of wasting your time. In a, even if it's an indirect sort of thing. And I wouldn't discourage you at all from one-on-one stuff, especially I think with the age you're working at. We read and follow a number of different scholars on discipleship. And I like to just use a sort of a financial example of sort of broaden or diversify your discipleship portfolio.
There you go.
Because, discipleship is going to take multiple forms. Jesus spent time with 12. He discipled the 12 at a time sometimes.
Yeah.
Paul is well known with the Paul Timothy sort of thing, and that's often the paradigm that we
Always.
focus in on.
Yeah.
But, Jesus had the three guys he did focus on, 12, 72. And there's a guy named Greg Ogden who used to be a pastor here in Chicago. He's written a couple of really good books. His most popular is probably Discipleship Essentials. But the one that's most helpful is Transforming Discipleship. And he talks about these different forms of discipleship and kind of breaks down the pros and cons of each. And so, you're still close enough in age right now to these guys where they probably wouldn't start writing you off as a sort of an old fuddy-duddy.
Yeah.
But, there are some young folks that really have trouble with authority. And it's possible at some point that one of these guys would just be seeing you as nothing but an authority figure. And they're not going to open up to you at all. And so you add one more or two more guys in the mix, groups of 3 to 4 people, that can change the dynamic immensely. And the accountability is easier because instead of them writing you off as just being a jerk and creating a personality conflict, you've got a couple other guys going, no, Parker's right. You said you were going to work on your temper, but dude, you don't seem like you're getting any better. You're getting worse, or something along those lines. But on the flip side, you might find people, even in a setting of just 3 people, they're so broken and hurt or have been betrayed so often that they're only going to open up in a one-on-one setting. So the idea is just to try to read the room, so to speak, and be able to work to whatever is best for that person at that time. And you can do multiples of these things too. You can meet with that kid one-on-one after you've met in a group of 3 or 4. So, and you probably are doing that already. You meet with guys in a group and you're meeting one-on-one. So maybe they're focusing on that in a way that they don't want you to neglect the one-on-one, because I know the one-on-one intimidates a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime I invite someone to be a mentor in our program, unless they have been actively mentoring, everybody to a T. I don't care if they're 35 or 65. They usually go, I'm not ready. And it's just, we haven't really prepared our people for that. And it's a daunting responsibility. And we can get into more, but it's not that hard.
Yeah, right. It's like, follow me as I follow Christ. And like you should be following Christ. So if you're not doing that, then you should probably not be discipling people. But yeah, who is it? Maybe Vodi Bakum. Some pastor once said, hey, if you took a bricklayer, and I know this because my father-in-law's a bricklayer, loves bricklayer analogies. If you take a bricklayer and you're the boss of the brick company, whatever laying company, and you say, hey man, this guy's 18, just joined just hired him. You've been doing this for 45 years, man. Can you show him the ropes? Can you take him alongside and teach him that? And you go, yeah, of course. If he goes, hey man, I don't know nothing about bricklaying. I'm not the boss. I don't know nothing about it. You'd be like, what do you mean you don't know anything about bricklaying? You've been doing this what have you been doing for 45 years? Like you're fired if you can't teach him that. And everyone goes, yeah, that makes sense. And you go, well, hey dude, like you've been a Christian for 45 years. Can you take this young 18-year-old dude and show him the ropes of Christianity, how to be a Christian? They go, well, hey, I'm no pastor. And it's like, bro, hey, you're fired. What are you talking about? You're no pastor. Like, haven't you been following the Lord? And I don't want to be, there's a certain context where he said that, where it made sense. And I don't want to say, I don't want to hammer everyone, but to some extent, I think we just haven't.
Well, there's truth to that. I know a guy when I was in the Marine Corps. So, we'll go off to specialty schools in the military, and this guy went off to artillery school. And so the main artillery school is in, at least it was, I'm a little behind since I retired, but Fort Leavenworth. And it's the Army school. They're the big Army. They got the school. Okay. And when you go and check into one of those kinds of schools, it's just like checking in at a new university. There's a bunch of check-in stations, and they got the tables, and so there are campus or base ministries there, just like you would have on a campus. Okay. You got crew, there's the navigators, they have military arms as well. And I think it was a crew. I'll just, for sake of argument, we'll just say it's crew. It could have been anyone else, but this guy went up, and he's a Christian. He went up to the crew table and wanted to sign up for Bible study. He's like, yo, I want to sign up for Bible study. Where do you got things going on? And as they're talking, getting to know each other, and he told them, hey, I've been a Christian for 10 years. I really want to dive in, and I want my faith to matter while I'm in the Marine Corps, et cetera, et cetera. And he's okay, cool. Where do you live on base? And he's plotting things out to figure out where he could plug him in. He's like, oh, you're over here. We don't have anything going on over there. How about you start a Bible study? Because I need something over there. And the guy goes, I'm not sure I'm ready to lead a Bible study. Now, figure out what 9 out of 10 ministry leaders would do. They would have said, okay, we'll find someone and we'll get you plugged in. This guy, instead, he goes, you've been a Christian for 10 years and you're not ready to lead a Bible study? He said, he's like, come back when you're serious.
Yeah.
and just left it. And the guy walked away stunned.
Huh.
He couldn't sleep that night. And he came back the next day, found the guy and said, "You're exactly right. I need to do this," and stepped out. And that's exactly the sort of thing, we don't have to be that harsh about it necessarily.
Right.
It's like, come on, dude, you've been a Christian for 30 years. You could at least meet with a 16-year-old kid and at least listen to his problems.
Right. I love that. I'm glad. I thought you were going to correct me there. Dude, that's great.
No.
You went even further there. I love that. Yeah, dude, I love discipleship, and I get all worked up about it because I don't know. Sometimes I'm like, dude, the older folks, they didn't disciple us. They didn't prepare us for college, blah, blah, blah. And I think about it, I'm like, no one really prepared them either, right? Like this just hasn't happened in generations.
That's exactly right. So let me go back to Jim Houston. We had him probably about 10 years ago, and he did a talk aimed at baby boomers. And he opened it up pretty much. I mean, he's a gentle guy, but he basically, with both barrels, opened up on the baby boomers going, "You haven't discipled the next generation.
Yeah.
You failed." And then kind of paused for effect, "Because you haven't." And he was basically exhorting them as we have to break this cycle. We have not been discipling the generations one after the other, and they haven't been. And I've been convinced, that, there's a big push, and I'm all for it. You know me, apologetics was, the gateway drug, if you will, for me to get back into serious theology and discipleship. And I think a lot of the role of apologetics, especially in the life of discipleship. But sometimes, the old adage, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem's a nail.
That's right. Yeah.
Sometimes we do that with apologetics, and everything's got to be fixed through apologetics. And I think we need to have a robust, don't hear what I'm not saying, we need a robust apologetics and train our kids and all that. But sometimes that's the only thing we think of doing is, I don't want to send my kids off to college without all of this. And I don't care. You could be a young William Lane Craig. When you're 18 years old and you're on campus and there's all of these pressures, you're probably going to fold at some point. What we do need to do is equip them with a fuller vision of discipleship. So they, even if there's no campus ministry around, like when I went to college, I was a pretty good Christian kid. I tried really hard. I was earnest. And then I went to college and I did I'm the statistic. Went way out there. I want to tell all the stories. I didn't know that there was InterVarsity. I'd never heard of those things. No one, my youth pastor didn't think to tell me about this stuff.
Right.
I went to a church once and it was a really flaky church. I'm like, I'm not going back. And had I at least had a rudimentary understanding of discipleship, the few Christian kids I knew on campus, I might have gone to them and said, "Hey, look, let's just get together and do something." And I might have banded together, sort of a band of brothers thing. So we need more than apologetics. We need to put it in the context of discipleship, finding others to be with, because you're going to need moral support. I mean, when that cute girl's looking at you at a party, you're going to have a hard time resisting that, even if you can break down the Kalam cosmological argument and all of its,
maybe that's why she's looking at you. Who knows?
If she's the Christian one, okay, then you can go break out the syllogisms.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah.
So yeah, it's rough without that discipleship. So yes, go in and have your apologetic arguments, but you got to do it in community and That's why discipleship's what we're called to do. It's what we are all given a responsibility of, right?
Yeah, dude. And even as you bring that up, I thought, if you're trained in apologetics, but your personality sucks, no one wants to listen to you anyways. If you're not like a fun person, like I think that's part of it too, is being someone who enjoys life, who has joy because you have the joy of the Lord, right? Like someone who their joy or their happiness is not based on circumstances, but they're like, dude, I love Jesus and I can make fun of myself and I can say, yeah, I'm the Ned Flanders of school, whatever. Like you can be silly and fun because you're trying to attract people. And then, you need the content, you need the gospel to share with them, but you also need to be like a fun person, like a person who people want to be around. And I don't know, we all have different personalities and stuff like that, but I think that's got to be part of it, is like being like Jesus and being like the full person there.
Yeah, it's a holistic approach to the Christian life. You can't reduce it to an argument. You can't reduce it to service. I mean, some people, people will err in one way or another. I like to use this analogy is, we like to think in categories, right? And so a minute ago, we were talking about, sports. So immediately we go to the mental bin of sports, or I brought up the military. So if we just kind of restrict it to the Christian life, we just talk about apologetics, theology, whatever. And so you got that bookshelf behind you, right? So each one of those, if each one of those mental categories was like a book on a shelf, okay, so we go to apologetics, we go to missions, we go to, fill in the blank with whatever else, theology, systematic theology, historical theology. For too many people, discipleship is one of those books on the shelf. And I like to think of discipleship as the bookshelf.
Yeah.
Okay, so each one of those things is a means to living out your discipleship. Or let's switch up analogies. Let's use something more Lewisian. Cul-de-sacs versus roundabouts.
Yeah.
We can make theology, we can make apologetics, we can make justice. You fill in the blank with whatever it is. We can make any one of those things a means into an end rather than a means to an end. It shouldn't be an end in and of itself. It should be a means to an end. And so, why are we doing theology? Well, for the purpose of formation, for the purpose of flourishing, to help other people understand and disciple them. Why do we do apologetics? Why do we pursue justice? Or why do we serve in the church? I mean, there are people who get so caught up in service, they're never really engaged in their hearts. They're just doing. Right. So it can be done with anything.
That's a great point, man. Yeah, that is very, very Lewisian. And he might even say, there's his essay, First and Second Things, and like.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. You got to put first. You have to put first things first in order to get second things. He says, if you put second things first, you won't even get first things.
Yeah, you'll miss everything. Also, he talks about theology being like a map. It's like a map of the ocean or a map of the coast, and like you actually want to see the coast as well. So don't get so lost up memorizing the map that you never go check out the thing in itself.
Yeah, exactly right. Our buddy Kevin Van Hooser has used analogies, and I like, in his book Faith Speaking Understanding. And this wasn't his analogy, but when I read his understanding of theology for the purpose of discipleship, I had gone and talked to him after reading it and said, "You just gave fuel for my discipleship engine. I better understood the role of theology in discipleship. How it can be fuel for." What I call the discipleship engine. So we could trade analogies all day long, but ultimately, I think a more broad understanding of discipleship can drive those particular areas we're called to with a little bit more purpose and not feel like we're in conflict, with the Great Commission. And we can boil it down. It's we're called to make disciples and baptizing and teaching, and you don't want to get too far away from that. But maybe you're on the hospitality team at church. And this seems like a small job, right? Maybe not. Maybe you're the one person who affects whether that stranger coming in the church is going to stay, feel welcome, whatever. And you got to do it just right. You can't overwhelm them with tons of hugs and overdoing it and scaring them away because the introvert's like, don't touch me. Or the other side, if someone goes, I walked in and nobody paid attention. So the role of the hospitality person right there, that may be a first line sort of thing in fulfilling the Great Commission of drawing somebody into this family, into the body of Christ. So I think it can add dignity to the different things that we do. Yeah. Sometimes it's much more direct work. Hey, KJ and Parker are sitting down, getting into the Word and sharpening one another, or several degrees thereof, and can feed into that.
Yeah, man, that's great.
Parker may never meet that guy if the person who's on the hospitality committee was a jerk and chased that person out of the church. You never get a chance to meet with them.
Right. Yeah, dude, I have so many memories of my dad on the greeting team. He's crazy. He's like concentrate form of Joel and I. he's accidentally chased people away with his outwardness. But he has been a huge blessing to people as well. So that's funny, dude. There's so many times he's a nut job, man. I love him. Oh man. Okay, so KJ, I wanted to get into the Marine stuff. Like, did you the things you flew choppers? Are they called frogs? I never.
Yeah. Okay. So one lesson is the Army calls them choppers. In the Navy and Marine Corps, we call them helos.
Helos. That sounds way cooler. Okay, helos.
Yeah, whatever. It's just so when you're talking to your audience. I flew something called a CH-46. It's a tandem rotor, so it's the two rotors front to back. And we're often confused with the Army's version, which is a much bigger helicopter. They fly the Chinooks. This is the same family of helicopters, but helicopters are kind of broken down into light, medium, and heavy.
Okay.
And the Chinook is the heavy class because they're lifting big vehicles and stuff like that.
Mm.
Ours was a medium class, and it was more like the Black Hawk. So
what are you guys lifting with that one?
people, we're taking troops. Our primary mission is to fly into hot zones and insert Marines under fire.
Dang.
That's the primary mission. So it's sort of the infantry of the air.
So what's the little one used for then?
They are usually so they can be a utility helicopter. The one that the Army or the Marines use is the Huey. So it's a usually light attack or light utility kinds of stuff. So they may faster up some guys. They can do troops too, but oftentimes it's much fewer. We technically could carry up to 24 combat loaded Marines. And usually we're carrying somewhere between 10 and 14, something like that. But yeah, they're retired now. It was around from the Vietnam era up until 8 years ago or something like that. They retired that helicopter not long after I got out.
Okay. They figured, no one's going to match this dude. Now that he's gone, we just got to...
Not quite.
I wanted to get in, I want to trace your kind of journey into spiritual formation and discipleship, but I got to stay here for real quick. Did you ever want to do the Huey? Why'd you do the, I think it's called Frog. You still didn't answer me.
Yeah, frog. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so they call it the Frog because if you look at it from a certain angle, it looks like a frog kind of crouched, ready to jump. Okay. And Navy and Marine Corps, we all go through our flight school's Naval Aviation Flight School, where we're qualified not only to fly, but we're also qualified to land on and off ships. Okay. There's a different skill set there. And so we would bounce around from ship to ship as well as the shore. So there's kind of that lily pad thing.
Oh, nice, dude.
That's where they get it. So the Navy and the Marine Corps had frogs. Okay. Frogs, and since we're amphibious, they spelled it PHROG, frog.
Nice. Yeah. Well, okay. So why'd you pick? Maybe you didn't pick. Maybe I don't know how the Marines work, but why middle of the road? Why the middle one for you and not the Huey or the big one?
Well, I did want, my first choice was Huey at the time because they were scheduled to get an upgrade and become much faster. And I guess I just seen a ton of Hollywood movies and the Huey. There's so many Hueys in the world that it's easier for I've learned this later on. It's easier for Hollywood to get get their hands on old Hueys and use them. Yeah. But there's a trade-off when you're going through the selection process when you're getting finished with flight school. Is it's not only you choose an airframe, but you're also choosing a location. And I really wanted to go out to Okinawa, Japan. Mm-hmm. And the only aircraft that was permanently stationed out there were frogs. Okay. And so once I raised my hand and being willing to move my family to Okinawa, Japan, they said, that's what you're getting. So if they had Huey's Okinawa, that would have been my first choice. But
yeah. I forgot how long were you in Okinawa?
We were there twice. We did a total of about 8.5 or about 8 years. Okay. So first time we were there about 4.5. Second time we were there for 3 years. So about 7.5 years. Okay. So all in the span of about a decade because we came back to the States for 3 years and then went right back.
What? How long were you in total? I forgot about that too.
20 years. I was in from 92 to 2012. So right out of college, I took a commission and jumped into flight school.
Dude, that's awesome. So this is another reason I love talking with you, because if you talk to someone who is in the Marines or the SEALs or the service and the Army, whatever, like there's an aspect where you're like, all right, that dude's a man. Like that dude knows what's up. He, and you being a Gen Xer, we've talked about this, but all you guys are so chill. And it's like every time I ask you guys, hey, what does it mean to be a man? You guys are like, you're like, just go do it, man. Like, you're thinking about this too much. You're overthinking it. And I love talking with you about that. But I think I finally got you to feel the angst the other day.
Yeah, I can feel the angst that you guys are wrestling with it. I think some of the angst would go away if you didn't worry about it so much. That's right. Or like, just do it. And some of it, I thought about it after we talked, is I do think there are some, and you kind of admitted this as much, but I do think there's some cultural stereotypes out there that have been foisted on you. And maybe that's from my generation. Maybe it's more baby boomers pushing it out there. But, you don't have to be, you don't have to be Arnold or John Wayne and stuff like that. And I think some of those caricatures are still out there. For sure. But then, there's so much else going on with manhood these days. Right. And fluidity of sexualities and stuff like that. I guess, even after you left, I've thought about it. I go, well, no wonder, because everything's being questioned right now.
Yeah.
I mean, we even go back to questioning what it means to be human,
Right.
much less what it means to be a man. So I empathize with your angst a bit. I guess I still don't sweat it, but yeah, just go become a Navy SEAL. And
I know, dude. That's the thing. It's like, yo, you just go do that. Too late for me now, but well, I wanted to talk about that too, and I broach that because I want to talk a little bit about spiritual formation as a man, and maybe whether that is different or not from a woman in her spiritual formation. But I thought maybe we could trace just how did you get into like discipleship and getting back into Christianity. I know you mentioned apologetics earlier, but how did you go from flying a frog to seminary and discipleship and stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think maybe to start with, in this case, I'll violate the first things principle, but I think yes, there is going to be a difference with men and women. Like in our program, while we have some joint sessions of a class, men and women sit in class together, we do segregate them because we want men with men and women with women.
Mhm.
It's not like just this Billy Graham rule, like, oh, we can't trust you all, you're going to do stuff you shouldn't. It's because we want men to be able to open up and talk about things that are only pertinent to men,
Yeah.
and it's not always the stereotypical, oh, I've got a porn struggle. It's just
Right.
other things that are unique to men and women as well.
Sure.
And I won't put any words in the women's mouth, but I think they've got their own challenges. So I grew up in a good church, and I had no excuse to kind of go off and do what I did, but it all became clear in hindsight that I had never been discipled. And I think, I don't want to blame anyone in particular, but in my high school years, I felt really convicted and really compelled to try to live my faith out seriously. I mean, my sophomore year in high school, I gave up secular music, and nobody told me to do this.
Huh.
I just thought I need to do this.
Yeah.
And so in 1985, 86, whatever it was, I stopped. I turned off the radio and I tried to listen to Christian music. But there wasn't a ton of good stuff.
That's kind of hard. That's a hard task.
Yeah, that was the emerging days of like Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith, and great for the people who love them.
Sure.
I could only listen to them for so long. So after a while, I gave up on that, and I went back to The Cure and whatever else I was listening to. But that, I just say that as an indication that I was really trying.
Mm-hmm.
And I also spent all of my sophomore year reading Proverbs and praying for wisdom, because I thought if it's good enough for Solomon, it ought to be good enough for me.
Amen.
And that was something I just kept doing. But I had three men in my life that had a strong impact on me. I was really close to my youth pastor. And he just was somebody I would go to with questions. I would go to him all the time. I spent my summers working at the church summer camp. It was just in the northwest suburbs of Chicago, just along the Wisconsin border. And the camp director there was like an old school fundamentalist, fire and brimstone kind of guy, but a great dude. And he was a great impact on me. And he's kind of provided some of the fatherly discipline that I needed to have. And he made us work hard too. Yeah. We were working from like 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. It was almost slave labor. Yeah. And then in the school year, I actually worked at my church as a janitor when I was old enough. I needed a job. They needed someone to mop the floors and clean out the trash. And I was at Moody Church. It was a big church. Yeah. So there's a lot of floors to mop there. And so the building superintendent was a godly dude. So I had these guys, and while I was around them, no wonder I was on the straight and narrow. But in hindsight, when I was in college and I did my own thing, I realized none of those men directly poured into me. It was like secondhand smoke.
Yeah.
I got it through osmosis. And anything I learned, like I would usually go to my youth pastor to ask questions. I didn't really have a ton of one-on-one sit downs with him. There was, ironically, we talk about the gender, there was one, I say woman, but she was a young gal. She was a Moody student. She was a volunteer in our youth group, and she actually hung out with a couple of us. And I remember me and one of my buddies would go out to lunch with her she'd take us out to lunch and hang out with us. And so in some way she discipled us more than any of the guys. And I'm still friends with her today. She's awesome.
Oh, wow.
But she can only do so much for a couple of pubescent boys.
Right.
And she's a college girl herself. So she's still figuring stuff out. And so no wonder I didn't really feel equipped. And I didn't figure this out though until my early to mid 30s. So I was around 30 years old when I was going on a deployment to the Middle East, and I had a family now. And as I like to say, getting married and having children will sober you up both literally and figuratively. Um, and that was my story. And I realized, hey, I'm responsible for the formation and the growth of these kids.
Yeah.
I gotta get my act back together now while they're young.
Hmm.
And I was trying really hard, doing it in my own strength kind of thing. And a chaplain friend of mine who was a really smart dude and had really taken to having dialogues with me gave me a book before I deployed, and I read it. It was a Francis Schaeffer book. And it was the first time I read anything, at the time I considered it intellectual,
Right.
called a Christian Manifesto. And it was the first time mentally I could sink my teeth into my faith, because up until then it just been a generalized feeling. So I was able to engage thinking, and I was like, and I'd been a lazy thinker up until this point. Really terrible student, never horrible grades, because I was smart enough just to kind of get by, but I wasn't a genius where I was just going to automatically get A's. And now all of a sudden, like, this little fire was set off in my brain, and I couldn't stop reading. And that's when I discovered apologetics, turned the radio on, heard this Indian dude called Ravi, and then that led me down a path. And I started writing down names of people I've never heard of, like Chesterton, and started reading C.S. Lewis, and then I discovered William Lane Craig, and on and on and on. And it was my Romans 12:2 moment. And so as that goes on for about 2 or 3 years, I finally started to come to realize, though, I'm doing all of this stuff self-taught. How do I know I'm doing it right?
Yeah.
How do I know I'm really getting it? I think I'm generally right, because I had a pretty good upbringing. I don't think I'm spouting any heresy, but there's different stuff on, like, okay, I'm not as much of a nerd in this as you, but we could talk about, okay, A theory or B theory on time, which is,
Right.
There's certain things where I was starting to get smart. I wanted to be more and more precise.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know why I picked this view rather than this view, and so I grew up in a fundamentalist sort of 7-day young earth creationist dispensational, and I started questioning things like that, and changing my mind on some stuff, but I really didn't know or have any guidance. And that's when it dawned on me, I've never been discipled. And so I started praying for it, seeking it out. I had some near misses, and then I discovered this thing called the Csu Institute, and they had this 1-year discipleship program, and I did that, and I have never looked back. That was when all the gears caught and for me, and I felt like all of a sudden, geez, why don't we do this? Why don't we present the Christian life like this, rather than these very reductionistic, got to be born again, ask Jesus into your heart, and then that's it.
Right. Dude, I guess I didn't know it played such a big role in your own formation. That's crazy. I had no idea.
Yeah, I had gotten involved with a Marine discipleship ministry, and I really was hoping that I would get a lot of mentoring there. And it's nothing against them. It's a great organization, but they were starting up, and they were really looking for laborers. And I knew enough theology at the time that they were looking for me to kind of contribute and help carry the load. And I did. I was anyone out there that's in the military, especially the Marine Corps, look up Tun Tavern Fellowship, TUN Tun Tavern. It's a network of Christians in the Marine Corps, and you can just plug in wherever you're at. And it was great, but I didn't find that one person that I could just kind of sit at their feet. And so I found that at the Institute, and the guy that was my mentor in the program was the president of the Institute, and he's the guy that had created this fellows program, and he just saw how hungry I was, and has just been pouring into me for the past 12 years.
Yeah. Dude, that's awesome. I don't know if I told this story in the podcast. It's very loosely related, but I have to say it. In college, we had this. She might be listening right now. We had this girl, young, couple of years younger than me. Maybe I was a senior. She was like a sophomore, and she was all on fire for the Lord, and all of us were. It was great. But we learned about Christian lingo the hard way. So she's talking to her non-Christian roommate, and she's like, I want to. Like, I want to tell you about Jesus. I want to share my faith with you and stuff. She's like, oh, okay, cool. And she's like, yeah, I'd love to like disciple you and then start pouring into you. I'd love to pour into you. And she's like, cool. What do you want to pour into me? Because she had no frame of reference for what that means. And I went through this phase where I was like, all right, we got to like drop Christian lingo. And then I came full circle thinking like, that's actually really helpful terminology. You're pouring into someone, you're pouring in the knowledge, you're pouring in your own life and how you've grown in Christ likeness. But I like it because you can't pour something you don't have, right? So like if you're not being filled up, then you have nothing to pour out to anyone else. And so I came full circle, and I really like it again. But I just thought that
Yeah.
was so funny.
Well, make sure if you teach that phrase to somebody, you're explaining to them. There's that whole parroting of things. It's like the
Right.
guy that he parrots William Lane Craig's cosmological argument, and then he meets a savvy atheist who goes,
Yeah.
"Well, what about these objections?"
Right.
And then everything falls apart.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. Well, so you did the C.S. Lewis Institute. When did you end up coming around to TEDS then?
Yeah, so I did the institute around 2008 or so, and I should say in the meantime, I had gotten really involved with the ministry of Ravi Zacharias, and they did these week-long summer institutes at Wheaton. And since I'm from Chicago, it was genius. I could fly home for 2 weeks, take 2 weeks of annual vacation with the kids. We'd spend a week with family, then dump the kids off with grandma and grandpa. And then me and my wife would go sit at Barrows Auditorium at Wheaton College and listen to John Lennox and Alistair McGrath and all these other guys that they would pull in. And so for a period of 3 or 4 years, it wasn't just me reading. There was just sort of a little steroid effect of, I felt like I was having to catch up.
Yeah.
On years that I had wasted. Because I guess one thing I left out too is in college, I was an English major. Ironically, I hated reading. I loved writing, and I thought, oh, I can write. But I hated reading. But when I had that Romans 12:2 moment, I said I couldn't stop reading. That was like a marked change.
Yeah.
And so for about 3 years, I was reading every spare minute. I was reading, and of course, this is pre-social media, so it was easier. And I remember my wife like, just slow down. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I thought it was a phase. So like, I don't know how long this is going to last. I got to read up everything. And after about 2.5, 3 years, I realized, nah, this is the new normal.
Yeah.
This is a real transformational change. Mm-hmm. So I kind of dialed back. I'm like, okay, I got time to read this, but I still felt compelled to try to make up lost ground. I still feel that way now. I mean, I hang out with you and you're talking about stuff. I'm like, geez, how old is this guy?
Yeah, I don't know about that, dude, but I feel the same way about catching up too, because it wasn't until my junior year of college, and I had the same thing as you, where I was smart enough to get B's, but if I wanted to get A, I had to try really hard, and so I wasn't going to do that. And then I bumped into a philosophy major, and he just started asking me stuff. He was a Christian, and brand new Christian. He came to faith through Moody Radio, just listening to Moody Radio. I was like, that's crazy, because you're my age. Who listens to Moody Radio when you're my age? And then comes to faith out of nowhere. He's Middle Eastern, and his family is like loosely Muslim, and he just becomes a Christian, and then he's studying philosophy. And so through that and Athletes in Action, I kind of just woke up and I couldn't stop reading. And then I was thinking about it, like, dude, I have so much to make up for. Like, I should have been doing this my whole life. What's going on?
Yeah. I literally said multiple times in college that I was on the C's Get Degrees program.
Yeah.
I was the same way. So, I mean, I was just, but not like I was doing nothing. I was so hungry, and I started to have an inkling that there might be something more after my time in the Marine Corps. Yeah. And then I did the fellows program. I discovered that, and for me, it put things in better context. I started to see a little bit more, because I was starting to become one of those guys. Everything, every problem's an apologetic problem.
Right, dude.
And this helped me in that sense. And I still felt, though, after that, I felt I was called to become an apologist. Mm-hmm. I was on that wave for a while. But as one of the things after I left the fellows program, I had finished, and then I got orders, and I went off to California and then deployed to Afghanistan. But my mentor had given me some stuff to read, and he just kept pushing me deeper and deeper into a theology of discipleship. Mm. And I read a book on the biblical theology of discipleship. And this is before I knew that biblical theology was a category. I just thought it was one of those tautology types of things. Like, right. Okay, these an all anyways. And I grew a little bit more mature in my understanding of discipleship and things like that. And I just thought, I started examining my own life and going, here I am, a lay person, and I shouldn't have struggled the way I did. Not that I shouldn't be without struggle in life, but this part should have been explained to me up front, because I was in a good Christian church with good people, but it just goes to show there's a little bit of, I think, sometimes misunderstanding, or we don't communicate what we know effectively. Mm-hmm. And I probably should have known some of these things earlier on. And so I kind of resolved myself to, nobody should have to struggle like this again. Yeah. And so I didn't think I'd work for the Institute because I figured they know what they're doing. They don't need my help. I need to take this somewhere else. And I wanted to go into a ministry, like maybe an apologetics ministry or whatnot, to bring this edge into it, to go, hey, look, what you're doing is great, but let's make sure it's in the context of helping people grow in Christ. Because, apologetics ministries like to think that they're speaking to non-Christians all the time, when in reality, about 80% of their audience is usually Christian,
Right.
or those that are on the edge, like the nominal folks.
Yeah.
And so, okay, embrace that. Embrace the fact that you are reaching the lost, but that you are also preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
So let's beef that up. Let's make sure you're being responsible with that and being effective in those sorts of things. I thought I could take something like that in, but then it's really funny how I ended up at TEDS, because I was living in Southern California. I had met with Mike Wilkins, who was the dean of Talbot School of Theology at the time, because a friend, my mentor, had hooked up a meeting for me, and I'm like, this is it. I'm going to Talbot. I'm going to go study. They had their philosophy and ethics program.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's what I'm doing. But series of events and family and stuff like that drew us back to Chicago. And then I thought, okay, I'm going to go because I wanted to study philosophy, right? So I'm like, I'm going to Wheaton College. I'm going to study I'm going to do a master's in philosophy. They don't have a master's program in philosophy. No. And I was like, oh, they got a faculty, a staff, but they don't have a program because it's all for the undergrad.
Yeah.
And so they had a program at Trinity that I was interested in. And so in a sense, I say I backed into Trinity, but in hindsight, I can see why God had me there.
Seriously.
So, yeah. So that's where I ended up. And then it was while I was at Trinity that the Institute had said, hey, why don't you start the Institute in Chicago while you're there?
Dude, I'm so glad all that happened, because now we know each other through Joel. Joel's in your class, loudmouth, always going at the professor.
He asked good questions, though. I would sit there and go, okay, I can't think of some questions, but I know Joel will. And he always had good questions.
I love that. Well, dude, I love what you do. I want people that I disciple to go on and to be in the C.S. Lewis Institute to do the Fellows program. How can people find out about that?
The number of ways. The best thing to do is go to our website. It's one long word, cslewisinstitute.org. And then go to the cities. There's a tab for cities. Find the Chicago one, and all of my contact information is right there. But if you go on Twitter, Instagram, all of the usual suspects, you're going to find the C.S. Lewis Institute Chicago. We're in 16 cities, so just be forewarned that if you look up C.S. Lewis Institute, you're going to have to find the Chicago one.
Yeah.
So because we're growing, God's blessing us right now, so we're kind of all over the map. But if you go to our webpage and find me there, you can join us. And we're taking applications for a couple more weeks. I know it says the deadline is April 15th, but I'll take a few late applications. Okay. It's a tuition-free program, so you can't beat that.
Right.
Just come join us. It's a great year. And we have Van Hoosier teaching in the class. He's going to teach cultural apologetics for us this year.
He's so good at that too. I love that. Also, I have to just mention that for the watchers, people watching, if you look at KJ and you see Nick Offerman, you are not alone. That is, he looks.
You're not the first person to say that. He's the exact same age as me too, so I think he and I need to drink some Lagavulin together.
Yeah, I love that. So go study with the Christian Nick Offerman. Oh shoot, I forgot what I was going to say, KJ. C.S. Lewis Institute. How can they join? Oh yeah. Well, another thing is it's tuition free. So if somebody wanted to help support that, because someone's got to pay for that, is there a way that someone could donate to the C.S. Lewis Institute in Chicago?
Yeah, send me your winning lottery ticket. Yeah, no, same website. We have a give page. If you go to the same website and click on give right on the front page, or the easiest thing is if nobody can remember that, email me kj@cslewisinstitute.org, and I can help. I can, we do need help. We are donor run. But we do a lot of other stuff. If you're interested in partnering us in your church too, email me. Yeah. Even if you want to just chat and drink scotch, email me. Maybe we can raffle off an evening with Parker and KJ, and we'll drink scotch and smoke some pipes.
That'd be awesome, man. I love that. And
I'll provide the Nick Offerman Lagavulin.
There you go. And I won't take the video down just because you talked about pipes and Lagavulin. So take that. That's right. Dude, this has been so much fun. You got to come back and we'll talk some more spiritual formation, discipleship stuff. I really appreciate all the help you've helped me with, dude. I love talking with you. So I know that the listeners going to love that too. So thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, same. I appreciate you. And even though I have a hard time saying Parker's Pensées, I love it. Keep going. And hey, if you guys aren't subscribed, help him get to 1,000 subscribers. We need to get Parker out there more because we need more good content like this. I'm excited to be in the lineup now.
I love that. That's awesome. All right. Well, Lord willing, we'll be able to talk about this a little bit more, but that's going to have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.